Africa Business News, proudly sponsored by EY.
Up on Africa Business News, Kenya's fuel price at a 4-year low, JP Morgan places Nigeria on negative watch on its bond index, and Zambians head to the polls. Stay tuned.
Africa, it is huge, it is diverse, and its business landscape fascinating and dynamic. And that's our business here on your favorite weekly African business stop. We're joined by Boni Tunya in Nairobi, Christy Pola in Lagos, and we will hear from Christine Mundo here in Johannesburg as well. My name is Victor Homoeswana, and this is the Africa Business News. Boni, it's a new year in the east of the continent, Kenya in particular, and you start on a positive note. At least for consumers, the fuel price is at a 4-year low. I could use that.
Well, I could use that too. It is a sigh of relief, Victor. And yes, Kenyan consumers have, at long last, a reason to smile over the collapsing global fuel prices. Now, you see, Victor, after months of steady drop in the cost of crude oil in the international markets, the energy sector regulator in Kenya has cut the local retail price by a fairly big margin. I'm talking about margins we haven't seen in 4 years. The ERC announced that the petrol will cost 92 shillings and 88 cents per litre at the pump, a 4-year low. Now, diesel, the all-important fuel that obviously drives industries, agriculture, machinery, commercial and whatnot, is set to also cost just about 83 shillings and 3 cents per litre. And this is easing inflationary pressure across the economy in a big way.
Yet two headlines disturbed me, and I would like to hear your comment on them. The first one is the report about bribery involving Chinese companies operating the country, especially when those companies polled in the study singled out the Kenya Revenue Authority as the culprit. Boni, shed some light on this for us, please.
Well, Victor, this is indeed a black spot. Chinese companies have singled out corruption as the biggest obstacle they face in doing business in Kenya. And in a new business perception index developed by the Sino-Africa Center for Excellence Foundation, 75 out of 184, both private and state Chinese entities with businesses in the country pointing to the Kenya Revenue Authority, that's the Kenyan tax collectors' employees, as the biggest perpetrators of corrupt deals. Now, Victor, according to this report, 68% of all the companies polled noted that corruption was indeed a big obstacle to their business, with crime and insecurity coming second at 63%. So really, it is one big shame for Kenya.
Another disturbing headline is about the imminent delay in the construction of the 164 billion shilling power plant in Lamu. I do not like stories like this one, because my business is giving credit to African countries with progressive industrial policies, and I've given Kenya a lot of credit for diversifying its energy mix. Was my praise premature, Boni Tunya?
Maybe the praise was premature indeed, Victor, but I think the lesson here is that we may have to wait a little longer before we heap praises on any future projects. Now, the construction of Kenya's first coal power plant in Lamu has run into more headwinds after the consumer lobby group said that it will block the 164 billion shilling project. Now, earlier in the week, the Public-Private Partnership Petitions Committee threw out an appeal by the consortium of Chinese Hebei Construction Investment Group and the Kenyan Liketh Investment. And these two groups were seeking to stop the award of the contract based on the conflict of interest. However, the Consumer Federation of Kenya now has said that it will challenge the decision in court on grounds of conflict of interest. And if successful, Victor, the Lamu-based project will be the single largest coal power plant in East, Central and Southern Africa, excluding South Africa.
And finally, last week we had Tumiso Greater with us, who gave us the rundown on the reintroduction of Kenya's capital gains tax. Now the stockbrokers have filed a lawsuit against the new tax law. What's the story there?
Well, Victor, after just about 30 years, the giant has awoken and people are not happy. Stockbrokers plan to file a court petition challenging the new capital gains tax in the face of a 2-week stalemate with the Kenya Revenue Authority over its implementation. Now, while the law being reintroduced capital gain tax after the 3-decade freeze came into effect on 1st of January, stockbrokers in Nairobi have not started collecting levy from the share sales, citing implementation difficulties. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see until that particular matter is indeed determined. But obviously, we've seen the effect of that going by the turnover decline in terms of sales and share movement at the NSE.
Jittery start to the year for Kenya. Thank you, Bonitino, coming to us from Nairobi, Kenya. We are joined by Christine Mundo here in Southern Africa next. We are still on Africa Business News, and I'm with Christine Mundo here. The going gets really tough for banks in Zimbabwe as the Reserve Bank tightens criteria for operation. And we talk later about mining in that country as well. But first, the Indian coal mining company seems to always run into conflict, Christine, in Mozambique of all places. What is the story with this?
Well, labour disputes are at the centre of this particular strike action, which started earlier in the month. Local workers in Mozambique are unhappy about the conditions, saying that foreign nationals, particularly those from India, are being favoured over them. They're also citing, amongst other things, their living conditions, saying that the community quarters that they're made to live in, the conditions there are not meeting human rights standards.
I know the first time I see the story about Jindal, the mining company from India, it ran into difficulties about a year ago on its environmental policies. But tell me about Zambia. The Zambians going to the polls today. One of the presidential candidates, Edgar Lungu, sounding a warning, actually telling them to not ill-treat Zimbabwean workers. That sounds like a certain late King Cobra, they call him, Michael Sata, who when campaigning talked about the same thing. Hey, Chinese, do not ill-treat Zimbabweans. And I mean, Zambians, I'll act tough on you when I come into power. He came into power, ran into difficulties. What's your take on this one? I heard Edgar Lungu also talking about Konkola, the copper mines there, that they are going to have to do something for community responsibility. What do you make of the elections in Zambia?
Well, you're quite right. I mean, at this point, I mean, it's one of those interesting things where one can't call it. In fact, the latest opinion poll said that, you know, that Lungu would take it by a very small margin. But at this point, it's any man's game. But you're quite right. The issue of exploitation of workers in Zambia has been at the center. It's how Sata came in promising to fight for the workers' rights. Whether or not Lungu, you know, does better than his predecessor is another thing to be said. But, you know, just apart from the Chinese issue, we also have the issue of the fact that there is $1 billion debt that needs to be taken care of, as well as the fact that the copper price is also falling. So we need to look for alternative sources of growth. And then, of course, what I found very interesting is that all of these guys, there are 4 candidates potentially, each had to undergo a medical test just to ensure that they're fit for office. Of course, this is now the second time.
Yes, there was a story about somebody having cancer in Nigeria as well. With all these elections coming up, people are using health scares. And of course, with the president, they have a president, 2 presidents who died while they were in office. So they can't be too careful on that one. Thank you very much. Next up, Christy Cole Popola takes us through some of the highlights of the week from West Africa to wrap up Africa Business News. Out in West Africa, Christy Cole, the good news for me is that West Africa's largest airline, Arik Air, is resuming flights between Lagos and Douala in Cameroon. I think they're also going to Benin. They had suspended the service in the wake of the Ebola outbreak. But there's some bad news. JP Morgan has placed Nigeria on negative watch on his bond index at the time when Nigeria's equities markets are seeing capital outflows from investor sellout due to the pre-election uncertainty. How much worse can things get? We also hear Nigerians are now beginning to benefit from the sliding oil price. Tell us about that.
Well, on the good side, for the first time in a few years now, Nigerians get to pay lesser for fuel with a 10 naira reduction in petrol price from 87 naira, from a price of 97 naira now to 87 naira per litre. This comes after government announced the corresponding reduction in the pump price of petrol in response to the slump in crude oil prices in the international market. Now, about the JP index. In 2012, Nigeria became the 2nd African country to be included on JP Morgan's government bond index. That's after South Africa. As things stand now, JP Morgan believes non-liquidity of Nigeria's local forex and bond markets is making business difficult for foreign investors. The bank, which runs the most commonly used emerging debt indexes, says it will assess Nigeria's sustainability to remain in the key emerging currency bond index over the next 3 to 5 months. Now, if Nigeria is removed from that index, investors will sell Nigeria bonds off their portfolios, potentially resulting in significant capital outflows, which is already being experienced in the equities market and will in turn raise Nigeria's borrowing costs. But the Central Bank of Nigeria has said there is no shortage of liquidity in the currency market. But I must also add that what we are seeing now with the forex and bonds market is a fallout from a pressure brought about by the falling price of oil, which of course is Nigeria's main export.
Well, that takes us to our trivia, but before that, we also get to hear about the favorite stocks of Christy Cole and Bonnie. Stay with Africa Business News. Well, stock pick is upon us. Bonnie Tunyo, Christy Cole, tell me, which is your favorite stock? If I had $10,000 to invest, which stock from your region would you recommend and why? Who goes first? Let's start with you, Christy Cole.
Definitely, I would say Seplat is a good buy. It looks oversold, having dropped a significant 46% since it was first listed.
All right, Seplat is a very good story, oil business out of Nigeria. How about you, Bonnie Tunyo, in Nairobi or East Africa?
Well, Victor, I normally don't go for the agriculture and allied sectors, but this time around I'll go for Mumia's sugar. Now, the Kenyan sugar industry has been troubled. We saw the share price fall from 6 shillings. 2 years ago, it was 49. It went to $1.90. But last week, we had sentiments coming from the government suggesting they will bail out the company. Those sentiments, without any commitment, shot the price more than 70%, doing 350 today. It is expected to have a similar rally all week long. So if you wish to make a quick buck, Mumias would be your counter.
Well, oil and petroleum don't normally go together, but here on Africa Business News, they do. Those are the two stocks, Mumias Sugar and Seplat. And our trivia this week to the Africa Business News family is, this one is related to the one we had last week. You'll recall Cape Verde Democracy Day was celebrated in that country on January 13th. January 20th is also a public holiday in that country to mark the anniversary of a liberation struggle hero called Amilcar Cabral. The question is, which other country commemorates the same event in the form of a public holiday? Bonnie, Christy Cole? The country you're looking for is Guinea-Bissau. Amilcar Lopez da Costa Cabral was born in Guinea-Bissau of Cape Verdean parents. An agricultural engineer, writer, nationalist thinker, and political leader, Cabral is credited for his contribution to the liberation of both Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau. Remembered more fondly for his quote, "Tell no lies, claim no easy victories." Amilcar Cabral was assassinated on January 20th, 8 months before the unilateral declaration of independence in Guinea-Bissau. Mali also celebrates Armed Forces Day, and Zambia, as we know, is holding national elections. But to the people of Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau, we say Happy Heroes Day. We're back with you next week with more Africa Business News. We thank Bonnie Tunyo in Nairobi, Christy Cole Popola out of Lagos, and earlier on we had Christine Mundo in Johannesburg. Stay tuned to CNBC Africa. Best wishes to your team in the Africa Cup of Nations. Until next week, cheers.